what is life as a gaming product manager?
Gamification is a lot easier to do when there's intrinsic motivation, like you said, right? That's why, even like simple gamification constructs like streaks, etc., they work very well. And retention actually is one of the hardest metrics to move. So any PM working on retention, I feel you, right? It is extremely hard to move. You always feel that, okay, the next feature I build will solve all our problems, and then or the next feature I build, right? I think for me that was like a wake up call, right? Everybody should be actively using some kind of generative AI in their day to day. It is doing some crazy amount of time saving for all kinds of functions. If you believe that an experience is going to be something that you will cherish and it's something you absolutely want to do, I think you should do it. And creating something for the first time, it's better to build something really great for a small set of people, right? And see it work than build something.
Thank you very much, Rachna, for doing this. I think we are at the fag leg of the cohort, but ending the cohort on a high with such a seasoned speaker as you, this is always a pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine.
This is because the way I got to know you, and I guess everybody in the call should be aware of that, is so Rachna was a colleague and she studied with Ravi. Ravi was my first boss in Flipkart, right? And when he especially told about Rachna, and I was like super happy that he introduced me, and I think this has happened. So I'm super happy once again. Even before I start, I'm super grateful. Thank you very much for doing this. I think it means a lot to everyone who is trying to learn from people like you. Yes.
I seriously mean it when I say pleasure is all mine, right? I mean, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Makes sense. Janta, it would be great that you can showcase your faces also. That will be super nice. I think let's keep the session engaging. So I think I'll structure the session in a way. For the first 2-3 minutes, Rachna, I'll just do a brief introduction for everybody to know you, what your background is. And then for the next 30 minutes, I'll bug you with my questions. Like
Sure.
questions about culture, in general, about your principles as an operator and things like that. And what specifically have you seen really good operators do, which others don't do, right? And then for the next 30 odd minutes, people essentially raise their hands and they keep asking you questions. And I think there are a lot of people who would ask you questions from gaming, for culture, how team building, and bunch of other stuff. Right?
Sure.
Awesome. So Janpa, just to quickly give an introduction of Rachna, let me just quickly do injustice to that. Right? Let me try to do that. Yes. So it's wonderful to have you here, Rachna. I'm incredibly grateful for your time. We are incredibly excited to have Rachna Rao with us today. Rachna is currently the Senior Director of Product at Scopely and has a wealth of experience in the tech and product management space. With a career spanning over a decade, she has made significant contributions at prominent places like Zynga, CRED, and she was also the co-founder of a startup called Foodie Buddy. Right? Rachna has led product development in various capacities, from gamification and engagement platforms at CRED to manage the product lifecycle for major titles at Zynga like Farmville. Aapne suna bhi hoga. Her leadership at Foodie Buddy helped her build a platform supporting home chefs, allowing them to engage with the customers and manage their businesses efficiently. At Scopely, she continues to innovate and lead in a highly competitive gaming industry. She is an MBA from the prestigious IIM Bangalore, and she's a BTech in Information Technology from University of Madras. So we are incredibly excited to host you, Rachna. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So Rajni, the way I want to this is the seminal question that people ask at the end, but I kind of do it in the beginning of the call is. So I just want to understand the first thing. What is life as a gaming product manager? What is different about building products in gaming, right? In general, right? And what are those specific archetype of people who are able to excel very well, especially in that side? And I think the larger, deeper question is how gaming has helped you see products in a different lens, and how do they build better products in that particular dimension? That would be super lovely if you can answer that. Yes.
Got it. So yeah, I've also spent time thinking about this, right? Because I started my career in product started in Zynga in gaming. And then I spent like almost 6-7 years outside of gaming as well in my own startup at CRED, right? Before coming back to gaming, right? So I broadly see it as two categories of products. You have utility products, then you have entertainment products, right? In a utility product, the customer has a specific need, right? They're coming to do something, right? Either I'm coming to order groceries, or I'm coming to pay a bill, or I'm doing something specific, right? And you have to pay a lot of attention to how do you get that done in like the shortest amount of time without wasting the customer's time while providing a really good experience, right? And that becomes like the focus area, right? Now, when you're talking about either driving engagement for a utility product or building a game, right? Things get quite tricky, right? And what I have always fallen back on is you. One of the things you really need to understand well is the hooked model. There's a book also by Nir Eyal, right? And I have spent a lot of time thinking about that, right? It's basically you need to create that loop, which is trigger, action, reward, preferably variable reward, and then investment, right? Now, the consumer is not coming with any specific need, right? You need to hook them onto your product. They don't really need to play that game, right? Or they don't need to spin, that wheel, or like do all of that. So how do you really do it, right? So the trigger becomes important. So initially the trigger is could be external, right? You see an ad on a social media channel, or somebody tells you about it, so your external trigger happens, right? And then you very quickly need to set that feedback loop of I do an action and I get a reward. And the reward being variable is very important, because if the reward is not variable, then it gets boring, it gets predictable, right? So for example, if you're scrolling on social media, on Insta, right? The reward is different. You don't know whose picture you're going to see. You don't know which reel you're going to see, right? So that anticipation is really your reward. If you're playing a slot game, you really don't know what you're going to win, right? So the reward is variable, right? And eventually, and that is like really the turning point, right? What we're all hoping for is that the trigger becomes internal. So the trigger actually becomes boredom, right? Like if I'm bored, do I pick up TikTok or Instagram or this game or some other product, right? So creating that loop, changing that trigger from like external to internal is ideally what we're all hoping for, right? And investment is also very important, right? Because let's say somebody has experienced that loop a few times. Now you get them to invite a few more friends, or send something to somebody else, or upload a photo, right? And now once I've made an investment, right, we actually assign a lot more importance to something that we do than it deserves, right? And all the more reason that loop will get fixed. So this is really very different compared to when you look at a utility product versus a engagement or a game, right? And it's also unsettling, right? Because I've been in one team at Zynga which was shipping a brand new game, and it's really unsettling, right? All my other experience in gaming has been not in 0 to 1, but really in running a large established game. Like at Zynga, I was also managing Farmville. Right now, I manage a game which is not a new game, right? It's Bingo Bash. So you have to be comfortable with that ambiguity if you're building an entertainment product, which is a game. There is no reason the player or the customer is your product.
Yeah, it's so funny to kind of, and it's a very hard problem also.
Yes.
How do you make something extrinsic intrinsic and drive? And I think games try to do that. Initially, you probably serve them with so many rewards and stuff like that, but eventually the feeling is that it's that boredom that goes away from that time that you spend in the game, and it gives you some dopamine rush. And that's a very hard thing. I'll tell you one very interesting anecdote, very similar to this. In edtech also, it is the same thing.
Yeah.
The one thing that people generally undermine a lot is intent.
Right.
How much intent do you have? And if there is high intent, then you will become the best at what you essentially do. So I really want to ask this. It's so hard to make something extrinsic, which is driving through some. How do you make it interesting? How do you figure out those seminal points that now that shift is happening? How do you do that in a game? Yeah.
It's not easy at all, right? I mean, so when you talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right, one of the things that I have kind of concluded is that gamification itself. Let's talk about gamification first, right, and then we'll go to games. But gamification is a lot easier to do when there's intrinsic motivation, like you said, right? That's why even like simple gamification constructs like streaks, etc., they work very well. Let's say Duolingo, right? You want to learn a language, so it works really well. Even fitness apps, you want to lose weight, you want to get fit. So all of the gamification works. It's a lot easier to do in that case. It becomes much harder to do when that doesn't exist, right? Then it becomes very often like a rewards game, wherein you are just like giving me rewards and you're trying to train that behavior, right? Now in a game, again, I think you really need to have you need to be very comfortable working with creative designers, right? And math will not tell you everything, right? Whereas even if you're like, you can't just look at funnels and all of that and get an answer, right? So I think few things are very helpful, right? Really know your audience. Who are you building for, right? Because if are you building for a younger audience, are you building for an older audience, are you building for a female audience, male audience, it's very different. So you really need to know your audience, and at least if you're creating something for the first time, it's better to build something really great for a small set of people,
Yeah.
right? And see it work than build something kind of average for like everyone.
Yeah.
Another thing is, I think one of the things that I find to be very useful is like, what is your North Star metric, right? Now, what is just having that conversation sometimes helps uh, helps make decision making faster, right? So I'll give you an example. Firstly, what is a North Star metric? A North Star metric, usually if it goes up, revenue, it's a leading indicator to revenue, right? And it is what you want your consumer to do in your product, right? And sometimes it's easy to lose your way. So let's say, for example, you have a farming game, right? And yeah, it's going well, people are using it, etc. Right now, there is revenue weakness that you're facing, and a PM comes up with an idea to put a slots mini game to engage players or whatever, right? And sync out the virtual currency, because in any virtual game, you need to sync out currency, only then people will buy more currency. And sometimes those wallets get bloated. So you need quick ways in like syncing that out, right? Now, you might see a great spike in revenue when you put out that slots game, right? But is that good for the long term? And when you know what your North Star metric is, it helps kind of simplify this, right? Because what you'll realize is, let's say, for example, if you have the debate, you will know that your North Star metric is not revenue. That is the end goal for everyone, right? But the North Star metric for the product, let's say for a farming game, should be number of plants, crops planted.
Yeah.
Right? You will realize that on days when you do your slots mini game, your crops planted drops. And while that's a good thing in the short term, over a period of time, you don't want to mess with your North Star metric, right? So I think this is what product brings to the table. If you're really building an entertainment product like a game or something like that, but you really have to be open to hearing your audience, understanding what they want, and then defining guardrails, right? How do I measure success? So I think some of these things are important.
Makes sense. I think that's a very nice thing. One more thing that I generally see in gaming PMs is that they're very good with data, or how do they define metrics. And one of the things that PMs kind of fail at very poorly is they see a lot of vanity metrics and are
Yes.
not able to discern what is
Correct.
truly adding value, what is not adding value. How does this mindset, how do you look at metrics that way? That, okay, if you talked about number of plants, right, and if it's like a dual sided game, there might be some metrics which affect the other side also, right? So
Right.
I just want to understand, how do you even do that, defining that this probably is a metric which is kind of a true representation of where I want to be? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I do for any product that I'm working on is, right, I create like a metrics tree of sorts, right? Uh, so how does that look, right? Let's say the end goal for everyone is revenue. Now you start breaking that down into the formula for revenue, right? Which is your revenue is basically your users into your revenue per user. You can further break down your users into new users, returning active users, reactivated users, right? Now, new users, you further split it into organically acquired, inorganically acquired. Inorganically acquired, you split it further into your CPI and your budget, right?
Yeah.
Organic installs, you split it. Retention, your active users, you split into your active users into the retention rate, right? And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, right? And you go into the world of input metrics,
Yeah.
because the formula doesn't really hold anymore, right? Now it's a world of correlations.
Yeah.
And I try to push deeper and deeper, right? So let's say your build and retention actually is one of the hardest metrics to move. So any PM working on retention, I feel you, right? It is extremely hard to move. And so then you go deeper. What are the things that would influence retention, right? So for example, it is engagement. Engagement is a very big input into retention. Win moments, which games have, right? So for example, a game will track a metric like how many wins you had in a session. And if that drops, then you can predict that retention might drop. Or for example, if your DAU by WAU drops, right, the number of days in a week you play drops, that's a leading. So you go to that level, right? And So then you define your product strategy. Once you've gone into created this entire tree with all of the leaf nodes, right? Then you try to figure out which of these is going to now give you the biggest jump in your final outcome, right?
Yeah.
Which is either users or rev per user and ultimately revenue. So I try to do this exercise, and then you figure out, then your product strategy comes into play. So then you start brainstorming. So for example, your product strategy could read, I'm going to maximize revenue by increasing my user base, and I'll do that by trying to acquire users organically.
Yeah.
That becomes like your product strategy. Now, then you start thinking about features, right? You might think about features where you want somebody to share something, or you want to create like a social feature where you have to complete a task together. And then you really need to come up with like metrics for that particular feature. And what are the goals that I should take on that? Because the worst thing you can do is say that my target for this feature is like just a retention uplift of like X BPS, right?
Yes.
Because if that doesn't happen, you don't know what assumption is broken. You
Yep.
have to say that I want experts, like so many players to adopt it. I want, like, for example, the most common feature for retention is the daily bonus, right? What are the success metrics for the daily bonus feature? It is like the DAO claiming a reward, DAO claiming a reward every day. You have to take bets on each of those. So I think that's really what I like to do. And this is like ingrained into like gaming PMs, especially like Zynga 10 years back. Very data driven.
I think that's such a nice thing. The reason is because making an analytics system is generally hard, because generally what people realize, they have this sense of a user journey and then they don't really define it what goes into the user
Yes.
journey, and then at every step you're saying that, oh, this moves this step, this
Correct.
moves this step,
Yeah.
right? And that is something that's super powerful when you come with a lot of data. And I think
Correct.
coming from that point only, I want to kind of pick it. What is the general culture? What is the mindset that you essentially look at? And I think largely from an operator mindset, and I'm not constraining myself to just
Yeah.
product managers, like
Yeah.
really high quality operators, they
Right.
have certain behavioral traits. What would be those behavioral traits which essentially make anyone really a independent thinker and able to take initiative from their own and things like
Got
that?
it.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important traits, right, and this is very often a turning point in an operator's life, is to have a sense of detachment with what you are building, right? Not get emotionally attached to what you're building. And it's easy to say, right? But even in my startup journey, right, sometimes you don't call it soon enough that when something is not working, right? So, and that's why it's really important to write down these bets before you even launch your feature, because otherwise you're just kidding yourself. And like you said, right, then you just go into that hole of like vanity metrics and trying to figure out some way in which to show this in a positive light, right? And it's also important to know before you build something what that's going to do to the final outcome for the business. Yeah, something might move by like 20%, right? But like, what is it going to do to the final outcome metric also that you're trying to drive, right? So being very detached and unemotional about what you're building and being able to learn from something that fails, right? I think something failing is not the problem, but if you learned nothing from it and you're trying to package it as a success, that's like a bigger problem. So I think this is the one first thing, right, that I've seen in really good operators. The second one is they over communicate to all stakeholders, right? I think there are PMs who will say, I want you to build this, right? Or there are PMs that will say, this is the problem we are trying to solve, and I think this might be one way we can solve it, right? And that's when you open the conversation to everyone, and everyone becomes like a part of the solution, right? And those are usually the operators who will ship things fastest, who will have a team that backs them, who are able to turn things around, right? So it's really important and especially when you're making changes to the roadmap, right? And sometimes you will do this. You have to communicate. You have to over communicate, right? And so these are, I think, two extremely important things, right? And the third one is one of the things that I try to do is get early in the career, right? Get everybody comfortable with making decisions in ambiguous situations, right? I feel like, and my manager did that to me. So my first manager at Zynga, I would go to him with a problem, and he would say, "What do you think is the solution?" And I would say, "I don't know," and he would say, "No, try to figure it out." Right. So I try to get people to come to me with solutions, and that builds confidence very fast. That you see an exponential growth when people get confident in coming up with even complex solutions early on. So I think these are some of the traits.
But how do you balance then autonomy and accountability? Like that is a very hard tussle because you give that autonomy to someone and figure that out, and if that person doesn't have that drive, and generally a
Huh.
team is like a collection of different
Right.
types of people with different things driving them. How do you bring them to the same point that they put the same kind of effort and think like a unit? Yeah,
I think that's why the metrics design becomes very important, so that you think through what is the final outcome you're trying to drive and how you're planning to drive it, and guardrail metrics, right? What are the kill metrics, what are the check metrics, right? What absolutely cannot break. So if you do that with rigor, then you trust that player people are innovating and being autonomous within certain guardrails, right? If you don't do that, then it becomes like a free for all, right? Then I've seen like you have like 100 line backlogs and like randomly items are getting picked. But if you create a framework, then I feel like you can have teams that are working with a fair amount of autonomy, right? And then you obviously have checkpoints where progress is being reported, but it's very clear as to like what I'm trying to solve, also how I will solve it, and what how I will measure if I'm going in the right direction. So then it becomes easier.
makes sense. Uh, another thing that I keep asking like people, and I think it is a function of the culture that you build across. What is truly culture according to you? Like, what does it mean, right? And what is a culture? And people talk a lot about the growth mindset, that you should have a growth mindset. What really is the growth mindset, and how does it emanate from culture? And this is where people keep talking about in books, that if you have the right culture, you'll have a growth mindset, right? And I just want to understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think culture is super important, right? And I think it's I've been lucky to work in companies that have a great culture, Zynga, CRED, Scopely, and I try to imbibe a lot of that even while building my small team during my startup days. I feel like a good culture is one where nobody is afraid to speak up, right? One is that is very important, right? No, everybody's opinion does matter, right? And nobody is you can disagree respectfully, right? But the best teams are the ones where everybody is encouraged to question their managers, right? I sleep better at night if I know that my team is going to call me out if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, right? Because if that doesn't happen, then if people are just going to do whatever I tell them to do, that's scary, right? So I think this is like one of the most important things, right? Teams where active dissent and all of that is encouraged, it's good, it's healthy, right? So I think for me that is like one of the really important aspects of culture, right? And then of course being respectful of other people's time as well, right? I see that a lot has changed now, right? Largely most companies calls are set up during times which are mutually beneficial for multiple people, especially when you have global teams. You can't expect people to like hang around in office because someone wants a meeting to happen late. So I think a lot of companies now actively think about other people's time and respect it. Right? That's also I think really important. And I think another thing that stands out in some of the companies with the best culture is they're meritocracies, right? You don't get promoted because you have been doing something for 2 years. No, whereas you it's not like you can't get promoted if you were just doing it for 6 months, right? So I feel like that mindset, you prove that you exhibit competencies of the level above you, and it can happen in any amount of time. So I think these are some very important aspects of good culture.
Makes sense. I think this is so insightful where you kind of build this across. But one thing that I've always struggled with, and I think I see a lot of people struggling with it, is how do you deal with harsh feedback or negative feedback that you essentially get about you? Like somebody's criticizing you. How do you discern and keep that balance, that what is feedback and what is not? Right. And it's a
Yeah.
very hard thing. And why am I asking this is because when you're running a company, and sure you have, right,
Right.
the number of nodes that you have to deal with is so massive that the
Right.
chances of screwing up something or the other are relatively higher when you're particular in a job role, because you know that these are the 5 or 8 things that you have to do efficiently. How do you deal with that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's receiving feedback and giving feedback. Receiving feedback is not easy, right? Especially when it's negative. And I think one way to like, especially if you're getting bad feedback, right? I think it's important to ask for specific examples. And this works both ways. I think while giving feedback also, now there's a lot of managers are getting trained, right? That don't just give high level feedback and leave it out there, right? And even while receiving feedback, if it's a little vague, one way to do it is firstly try not to take it personally, right? And what I would do is, can you give me a specific instance where you saw this happening, right? And usually then the manager will give you specifics. And another way to close the loop is, now how do I change this, right? Can you give me can you specifically tell me how you would have done it differently, right? That makes it very more tangible. You can actually act on it. So even when I'm giving feedback, I try to give examples of something repeating, and give very specific ways in which that can be corrected. I try to do that even when I'm receiving feedback and giving feedback, but I think it's not easy. You have to not take it personally. I think that is the most important thing, right? And I think it's also important for to not just talk about negative feedback, right? I think I've been lucky. I've not had a manager who has just given me negative feedback and left it at that. I've also learned from them, so play up a person's strengths, right? Make someone feel confident, and then also talk to them about how they can get better.
In terms of how much do you think does the people that you're around, right, really shape the person that you are? And well, in that capacity, because I think the reason I'm asking this question is because a lot of people anchor on things in life, like maybe it is the title and the guys, please be on mute. I would recommend. Sorry, I'm really sorry. Can you unmute yourself, Rachna? Thank you very much. Yeah. So a lot of people anchor on the fact that whether they have a certain title, certain compensation, and it is a stage of life. But I really want to ask from a long-term perspective,
Yeah.
how do you make career choices? How do you look at people, and how much the presence of the right kind of people around you really shapes you into the person? Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I think this is a trap that people frequently fall into, right? I've seen people also quit jobs because I didn't get a promotion this quarter.
Yeah.
We would have gotten it the next quarter, right? And I feel like these are very short-term ways of looking at it. I mean, in hindsight, it's easy for me to say now that it doesn't really matter. But I also have been, in that position where you are an APM, you want to become a PM, or you want to get that senior PM promotion. It is important, right? But I really think in the long run, two things matter. One is the folks you work with, right? If you feel happy going to work, I think that is like the most important thing, right? As opposed to if you dread going and working with the people you are working with. That is really important. And do people challenge you, right? Are you comfortable, or are you learning new things constantly, right? Do people challenge you on a day-to-day basis? I think it's these two things that really matter. How I evaluate, career changes is also, so I've made some slightly bold moves in life, right? And I don't know if they are sensible or even logical. I didn't have any plans of starting up. I was very happy doing what I was doing at Zynga. And the idea for the startup came to me and my husband when we were brainstorming during his MBA. He was working for some case study competition. And then I spoke to my colleague at Zynga about it. And we just got really excited. And it's something we felt very strongly about. So, I feel like if you're going to regret not doing something when you're 80, right, you should probably do it. It's not a big deal, right? Yeah, my startup eventually didn't work out, but do I regret it? Not at all. I think it was like pretty incredible experience. So if you believe that an experience is going to be something that you will cherish, and it's something you absolutely want to do, I think you should do it. And titles don't matter. And I think now companies are also taking a stand on that front, right? For example, CRED doesn't have titles, which is very interesting. So it makes it easier to acknowledge that. Yeah, I think.
How do you bring this change across? Like, it is so hard, like knowing this, that how do you do that as a leader? And I see one thing that is very particular about, like, this. There was this thing that Jensen Huang said some time back, and he said, I was making products for an industry which didn't exist, right? And I had the best, most competent people in the room, and they used to ask me this question again and again: what are we building for? Accelerated computing does not exist, right? And it does exist maybe in a niche industry, which is gaming and other places, right? How do you drive that mindset across? And this is actually very hard. And I just want to understand from your behavior while running a company also, when you hired people, what did you look for? What did you look in them that maybe this is how it will actually pan out? Yeah.
So I think are people, do they demonstrate enough examples from their past, right, of challenging the status quo and pushing themselves out of their comfort zone, right? I think even when I'm interviewing folks, one of my favorite questions is, give me an example of a situation that pushed you out of your comfort zone. This does two things, right? It's a level playing field because you're not putting an example that you're more comfortable on top of the person interviewing. So it allows them to talk about something that they did that pushed them out of their comfort zone, and you can you can go as deep as you want, right? And it very clearly sets apart, folks who have like just resume bullet points or who've been coasting versus people who actually pushed themselves, right? And you will then hear examples of, this was my day-to-day job, but there was an inefficiency. There were things were being done manually, and I actually automated it. And how did you automate? They actually have genuine answers to how they did it, right? So I think people who don't view their job as a series of tasks, I think that is what you need to look for, right? So what did they actually do? Was it a part of their job description? If not, why did they do it? I think this is an interesting question. It usually helps you figure out if that the person has that mindset.
Makes sense. This is such a nice conversation. Honestly, I've taken away so much as an entrepreneur. The last question that I want to ask, and I don't want others to hold up because I want to give everyone ample. And Janta, please start raising your hands, articulate your questions. Well, that's how it is. So please start raising hands. I'll call people up across. But the last thing that I want to ask, what did honestly entrepreneurship teach you? Because in the last 8 months, it has taught me so many things. I want to hear some anecdotes from that life that which essentially brought something which was not in your perspective, and it brought that shift while you were an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple of things for me as a product manager entrepreneur, right? So the first lesson I learned was product manager entrepreneurs frequently fall into the trap of building a feature to, to solve lack of PMF, right? So you always feel that, okay, the next feature I build will solve all our problems, and then not the next feature I build, right? So I think for me, that was like a wake up call, right? I mean, your data, your audience is telling you something. Just look at it. The next feature is not going to solve your problem. So that awareness, right? Also, I think fundraising was like a very, very challenging thing for me to do, right? Because at least I came from a world wherein you put up a plan and you meet that plan, or you at least have a very high probability of meeting that plan, and that's the plan you submit, right? When you're pitching to an investor, right, you have to show that, assume what does like nirvana state look like, right? Like assuming you everything goes right.
The larger picture. That's the grand vision.
That is the grand vision, which is like say 20 years down the line, right? And let's say everything from product, team, market, everything aligns. How does that look? For me, that that was a big shift to make, and I'm sure that's something you are experiencing
100%,
right now.
100%.
It's like I need to remove my day-to-day executor hat and become the dreamer, and I feel like that is not easy to do. So for me, that was like big.
I think in this case now there is this one question that I keep asking myself, and I tell my students also. Whenever I look at a task, I ask myself that when I zoom out and I say that, oh, let's assume it takes me 3x the amount of time to achieve that. Is it still valuable? Is it still worth?
Yeah.
And when you do put that lens across, then you say, oh, this task today is maybe just one instance where I failed, but it's like and generally people have a very myopic view of growth, and they overestimate growth in short term and underestimate it in like long term. And that their pain bearing capacity is something that I've at least learning in the last 8 months.
Absolutely. And one of my mentors, he used to say, so what, right? And we would be like, no, this is going to work out, or this will happen. And it's like, okay, so what? What does that mean in the larger scheme of things, right? So ask yourself that, like, even if this works, who cares? Why should anybody care, right? And I feel like sometimes that's like a wake up call.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. So, Janta, I'll start calling. Please, other people also articulate your questions. You can ask questions. So, Gaurav, I'm calling you across. So, Gaurav is already a product manager, Rachna. Gaurav, please introduce yourself and go for it. Yes.
Thank you, Mia. Hi, Rachna. Myself, Gaurav. I'm currently working with the VW Volkswagen IT services, and Thank you for joining here today. Trust me, Shravan, we are talking about you since beginning of this cohort, like
Oh,
about
okay.
capabilities, and we were excited to talk with you. Rasna, I see. Whenever I used to watch a video on YouTube or something, now sometime what happened, I used to see some games ad. So these kind of fake games of fake ads of some games. So what happened, there is a player who is doing this shooting things, and some obstacles are coming. So I installed a game and I played. When I opened that game, it is totally different, like nothing related to that ad. Then I read about it, and I come to know about a term which is called whale in the gaming industry. Then I read it more, and I come to know like only 2% of people out of 100 millions of people are willingly to pay the money for game they are playing. So I thought like it is a very hard and very challenging things, earn money from the users who are playing the game. Because when I see myself also, I don't want to pay money for playing game. And recently time I have seen like games like Candy Crush, they are the popular game of the time. At least in India, I am aware. So they are also started running these fake kind of app. So if 2% of people are paying the money, and I'm not sure how much they are paying also. So how gaming industry is still growing? Because there is a lot of people in India now, YouTube and these things are there. People are encouraging other, okay, don't worry, don't go for corporate job and or follow your passion. If you want to play games, then play. How still still it is growing? This is my question.
So I think you have a few questions. I'll try to break down my answer into a few parts, right? So firstly, I think the right thing to do is to have the experience continue in the app, right? I feel like some of these strategies are possibly growth hacks, right? Wherein you are trying to you're trying to minimize your cost per install, and that's why different types of creatives are tried. But the right thing to do really is to have that experience continue in the game, because if you don't, if it's a broken experience for a player, right, ultimately it will impact your retention numbers and your LTV, right? Because you might still acquire somebody, and this is not in games, right? I think literally anywhere you're trying ways in which to lower the cost at which you convert someone, but ultimately if the promise doesn't continue in the product, that person will most likely churn, right? So the right thing to do is definitely to have that experience continue. Now, how do games make money, right? I mean, these games are called freemium games. So the whole idea about a freemium game is you can play it for free. The core loop, the core set of actions, at least for a set amount of time every day, can always be played for free, right? And these are also social games. So the more people play, the better it gets for everyone, right? Like it's more fun to farm with your friends or to like play. Let's, for example, I manage a bingo game, so you play bingo with other people, right? So it helps when there are large numbers of people playing these games. Now, for a freemium game. It is true that a small percentage of players are actually payers, and that percentage varies for like casual games or social casino games, etc. But the idea is that you pay to either progress faster or you pay to play more, and that's why it's really important for that core loop, that hook, to firstly work. That in earlier I spoke, right, about you need to have a large number of people who are hooked on that reward, that trigger and action reward loop, right? And then as you get players to enjoy the game, as they get more familiar with the game, right, then they might want to expand the real estate on which they play, or they might want special power ups. These are very strong motivators, right? And it boils down to like very similar things in psychology, right? Like you don't want to wait for something, right? So that's a tool. So like some games will say early access, sell early access to content, or you really want to top the leaderboard, right? We like to win, we like to compete, right? Or many of us are competitors, so you might pay to play more on a certain day, or you might be a completionist. You want to get every sticker on that album, so you might get 8 out of 10 stickers for free, but the ninth and the 10th sticker you have to pay for it. So gaming. I think there's a huge intersection between psychology and gaming, and that's really how games make money.
I think one more thing I will tell Gaurav, this is why and you see that enterprise B2B products typically also move, because they have this strategy called land and expand. Land is the core loop, right? Like Slack. You're always free for you, right? But the moment you essentially want to jump towards, that is where great experience. But gaming may or be hard because there is some utility to Slack. you want to communicate. Now in game, you have to build that kind of an experience where you have to. That's why gaming companies also look at the time spent very, very actively, because what are they doing in the platform? So that is, I think, a very, very strong indicator, and that's why it's hard to build really, really. But if you really build an addictive gaming product, then you have like all the gold in the world, right? So awesome. So Pallavi, I'm calling you across. Yes, Pallavi, over to you. Again, Pallavi is also a PM.
Hey. Hi,
First,
Pallavi.
Hi.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Pallavi.
Yes. Hi, Rachna. Good evening.
Hey.
Very, very happy to have you here. So I'm also working as a product manager at First CRED. So basically, first of all, I would not miss this opportunity to ask you one question as a very frequent user of CRED, and you are from a CRED. You have worked with CRED platform. So basically, as a user, I'm very nudged to the concept of the CRED, which is having that is a game that they have incorporated in it, which is the CRED coins. And user basically you do a payment, and then suddenly a screen comes where you have to like scroll, spin the roll, and you get basically CRED coins, and where the user gets hooked to, because there are certain cashbacks, though there are not many cashbacks, but still when you see and look at that CRED coins, you can virtually feel like, oh wow, I'm rich, right? So I think that building that user experience, when we look as users and also as a PM angle, it feels very great as a feature when I'm looking at this. So, Rishna, my just question to you is this: what was the intent, like from your? I would just want to understand from your perspective, as you have worked with CRED. What was the intent of building this, and also what were the major challenges when you thought of incorporating such things on the platforms, basically building a gaming platform on a platform like CRED? Yeah.
Yeah, so firstly, I think CRED has a brilliant design team.
Yeah.
Themselves, the design mafia, they're just amazing, right? So I think CRED's design is, I mean, everyone knows it's just incredible. And a lot of that experience comes from that, right? Very often we think of flows and we think of, what we want the end user to do. But, CRED just has that very design first mindset. So all of that experience, I think, comes from there. I think the biggest why does that exist? I think so. CRED is a rewards. It basically it pays to be good, right? Is CRED's tagline. So if you exhibit good financial behavior and you consistently exhibit good financial behavior, you'll get CRED coins, and you can use your CRED coins to get rewards, right? And the whole idea is how can we make the whole process of claiming your rewards as delightful as possible, as engaging as possible, right? Because it's not even about the reward anymore. It's also about like how entertaining it is to collect your reward. Right?
Yeah.
So that is really the purpose, right? Now, there's always like a very there's one thing you should always remember while trying to do platform gamification in a product which is not fundamentally like an entertainment product, right? You can't mess with the core loop, right? So, for example, even in Amazon, I'm sure after you place your order, you get this pinwheel where you can do it. Right now, it's very important to know that the North Star metric for the company is, for Amazon, for example, of a first cry, it's transactions, right? So any of the gamification and the entertainment stuff should come after that, right? And ultimately, that is the end goal, right? So I think just ensuring that you balance that. You want rewards are important. You want players, members to feel very rewarded, but you need to respect that they've actually come to the app to do something else. So let them do that, and then find the engagement entertainment section, which should again nudge them back to the core value prop of the app. So that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
Yeah.
very cool.
Thank you.
Very cool. I'll quickly bring Abhishek. Abhishek, I'm bringing you across. Abhishek is a PM at Upstocks. Rachna, please, Abhishek, over to you. Yes.
Hey, Rachna. Thank you for spending your time today with us.
Welcome.
Actually, I wanted to understand something a bit from your gaming and entrepreneurship background. So I wanted to ask about activation, and there is like two layers to this question. So in general, activating someone, a user, but I want to talk about the second layer of if you want to activate someone for a different kind of a mission or a separate task. So assuming, let's say you're designing a game and there is a separate mission that you want the user to do. It might be a different experience that you want to give to the user. But the challenge is that if you force him too much to there or them to there, it might affect attention also.
Correct.
So how do you in general deal with it, deal with the situations? So I understand there is some vagueness in this question, but yeah, I'm
Yeah.
a similar problem at my end also. So I wanted to understand.
I think the question is, why do you have the secondary flow, right? What are you trying to solve with it? I'm assuming your secondary flow, either it's a short-term pain that you're trying to solve, or you believe that the secondary flow will in some way supercharge your primary flow. Is it one of these two things?
Yeah, mostly second.
Mostly second, right? So you're hoping that the secondary flow eventually comes and makes your primary flow more powerful, right? So, like I said, I think you need to respect that. And your primary flow metrics always are your check metrics, right? Ultimately, in fact, that's your final outcome metric. You want that to improve, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to do this carefully, right? You should not have forced flows. Ideally, don't. It should, the more the more it can complement your primary flow. Again, my answer is a little vague as well, right? But the more you can complement the primary flow or like lead into it from there, the better, right? It should not feel like a standalone thing. It should feel like an extension to the primary flow, and that eventually rewards you and pushes you back to the primary flow only. So I think it's very important to also talk to consumers when you're doing stuff like this, right? During my startup, at least I spoke to hundreds of home chefs. And a lot of the assumptions, like I said, like the geography, the gender, the age, all of this matters. So sometimes we have a lot of assumptions, and if our target audience is in a different demographic, just talk to them and you might figure out an answer. Sometimes it's just that, we look at too much data and everything. Sometimes you just have to talk to a few consumers and you get your answer.
Yeah, I think one more thing that I would definitely want to add here, just so you asked a very contextual question, it is also dependent on the fact how much value your primary flow has given to the user. Because let's assume you have kind of topped that across and you've set that benchmark across and see this is the best damn flow. Then making even a forced flow kind of brings that thought in the person's head that this will also be really high quality. So maybe I don't understand the better solution part of it, but it is that their primary flow should be extremely, extremely powerful in that scenario. Like I'll give you one example in education. A lot of times when we used to build apps in Baiju, right, we used to understand that asynchronously this is the journey that works, but we also knew that a video led journey would be way more powerful, even though it takes time to activate that across, right? So we were very conscious about it that okay, we'll probably insert first 2 minute snippets and see a retention over there, then we essentially push out a longer video to certain people. So you will have to define those journeys very, very carefully, right? And again, I keep repeating this, activation is typically discovered. It's not something that you kind of hypothesize. You might hypothesize an initial thing, but over time your users will tell you what they really like. Makes sense. Awesome. Next, I would want to call across Nikhil. Nikhil, I'm just calling you across. फिर अंशपाल जी, and then I'll call you again. Yes, Nikhil, go for it. Yes.
Hi, Rachna. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. It was refreshing hearing you speak about the specificity, especially the metric tree that you were kind of visualizing on the go. I could really understand how that breaks down and brings so much specificity and guardrails for your team to not go wrong. How you
Right.
can really, build the fences around it. But my question is two parts. One is around you yourself. I've been a business analyst, a project manager, then a product person, then an entrepreneur, and then specifically into gaming industry, right? A lot of individuals are today trying to break into product management, and specifically they might be aspiring to be gaming product managers as well. What are the key differentiating aspects that you see are important for people to keep in mind or to try to upskill themselves on for gaming product management? How is it different from others? That's the first part of the question. The second one is usually we build really interesting things like the CRED part or the games that you're working upon. But the way we build it, you're still using the age-old boring stuff of DevOps or Jira and those kind of uninteresting products. Have the thought ever do you do something more interesting internally, or have the thought crossed your mind about how to really gamify these aspects of things so that the adoption is much more than where it is today, so that it increases the efficiency of the functional IT teams itself?
I think the second question I would also rephrase. Does gaming help productivity also? Does the mindset of gaming helps productivity also? That all of these mundane tasks, they really get structured out of your way and you focus a lot more on discovery? Or I just want to break that myth also, that what is your day like? Do you spend a lot of time on mundane tasks or boring tasks, right? And not so on like the interesting bit where you do design discovery, product discovery, and things like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So your first question was really how can somebody upskill themselves and get that foot into the gaming industry, right? I think s- play games. Firstly, play a lot of games, and I'm assuming maybe if you want to break into the gaming industry specifically, you already do. So I think that's definitely one way to do it. I think being curious, like play games, explore other products, try to break it down, right? Try to understand why it is built a certain way, right? For me, product deconstructs I feel are a great tool to really, and I try to get my team also to do it more frequently and all of that, right? Because it really forces you to think about why a product is built the way it is, right? So I think, and that will also definitely help you when you're interviewing, let's say in a gaming company or any company for that matter, right? Just break down a product, and it's very simple really, right? Like you have to ask yourself few questions, like how does this product acquire users? How do I think they acquire users? How do I think they monetize users? How do I think they retain users? And then the features will be staring at you in the face. If you ask yourself these three questions and try to answer them, right, that's basically what you need to do to deconstruct any product. So that's the first thing. The second one is my uh, day very mundane? Do I do a lot of tasks that are repetitive, etc.? So I am actively trying to use ChatGPT, Gen AI to make things simpler, right? So for example, I have a GPT that writes one pagers now very fast, so that saves like a good amount of my time, right? I'm trying to get my team to like, can you create a data analyst GPT, right? Just upload data, upload your calendar, see what it tells you, right? So, and this has been very interesting, right? Initially, it took a little bit of time, but now I use it a lot, right? Whether I'm organizing my thoughts for something, or I have an idea, but it would have taken me like 1 hour to write a one pager, but it happens in a few minutes. So I think definitely the world is changing there, and everybody should be actively using some kind of generative AI in their day to day. It is doing some crazy amount of time saving for all kinds of functions, all our functions. Even I've used it to like modify SQL queries. Like I I just asked ChatGPT, this is the query. Can you like give me a modified version? And sometimes I still run queries myself. I don't have enough time to do it too much, but I think every PM should do that. If you don't, that's a skill that's good to have. I know it was not a part of the question, but it's something I had to say.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Next, Hanspalji, I'm calling you across. Hanspalji, over to you. Please go for it.
Thank you, Shravan. Thank you, Shravan. Hi, Rachna. Thank you for coming on, Rachna, and sharing your inputs mainly on the metrics part, which I think majority of the product manager, even on for a product, has a major key metrics. And thank you for talking about the promotions point as well, which should take place as per the work and not as per your time and time frame. So as I have spent like majority of my work experience working with the service-based companies like HCL, Wipro, I want to check your viewpoint on how this behavioral trait can be brought as a change in service-based industry, where promotions are tied up with the number of years an employee spent on one position, and rather than how efficiently that employee has worked on his role and how he has improved the way of working as well. Because in service-based industry, you know that until unless you complete 24 months or 18 months on one position, you are not eligible to get a promotion. And I think majority of the people are in India, especially work on the service-based industry, and very less get a chance to work on the product side, as product is still booming up. So I just want to know your viewpoint, how this can be brought as a change in the service-based industry.
That's a interesting, deep question. It's been a while. I was also a part of the services industry. I started my career there actually before I moved to product. I think, how do you get any company to influence it? I think the real question is really, how do you get a company to change something that's been a policy or a way of working for really long, right? I think that is really the question. And the pace at which promotions happen is just one such policy, right? But Influencing organizational change is, to be honest, I'm not an expert in this, right? I'm sure there are experts who've studied this org behavior and changing structures within an organization, right? But I would start with honest conversation with people who have the power to make these changes, right? Like, for example, if you know people in product industries who've done some great work and, gotten promoted, and how that kind of creates a cycle of everybody wanting to do more than just what is expected of them, right? You want somebody to do more than just their job description, right? And if you have enough examples of this happening in other companies, and more importantly, how that finally creates a culture of things moving much faster, having an open conversation with either a business, maybe start with a business leader, right? And make a case for how this would eventually impact the business positively. Right? I think that's a good place to start. Just open up that conversation, and that's, I think, a good place to get it started.
Makes sense. And Swati, इसमें एक बात मैं आपको फिर बोलूंगा. One thing that I want to add to Rachna's point. One is to make that commitment. The one thing that I would definitely recommend is change starts with you, right? Are you meticulous? The first question that you have to ask. The point is not whether somebody is doing documentation or not. The point is, are you doing it? Right? Similarly, are you going to a meeting with an agenda? Right? Are you setting up that context way before so that you can do you have enough proof points to put that across and say that this makes sense from a larger perspective? See, again, as Rachna said, that most things are tied to KPIs, right? Your decisions or your projects or your things that you bring across, if you have a very clear path of how it's affecting this particular KPI, everybody would want to do it, whether it's service industry, whether it's product industry, because har ek ko revenue grow karna hai. There are organizational challenges, but deeply it starts with you. If you show a consistency of doing that, they will notice and they will give you that chance across, that where you can essentially go across, even if other people are not doing it. So I think that's the first place to start, but it's a hard thing to do. I know when nobody's doing it and you have to do it, I understand. That's where resilience kind of comes in.
Right.
Make sense?
One more thing to that, right? Just to add quickly, I'm sure you also know who the outliers in your company are, right? Just starting rituals with those outliers, right? Like, for example, in a product company, one of the things I do are product lunches where you invite people to present. Like some PM would run a deconstruct. You can always identify other people like you who really want to grow fast. And can you create rituals that get noticed? Right? That's another way to do it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Super, super cool. Next time, Kiran, I'm calling you across. So Kiran was a PM at PTM. So Kiran, please.
Hey, hi.
Yes.
Hi, Rachna. Yeah, thank you for having us talk today. So Rachna, my question is related to the hook model which Neeriyal has proposed. So my main doubt is whether can we incorporate some form of time element in that hook cycle, whereas after setting up a trigger, how much time would the user take the action? Because it varies widely with the industries, right? Let's say if we talk about the example of Zomato sending us a biryani notification, will immediately push the user to open the Zomato app and look for, at least explore for some time within the app. And vis-a-vis, let's say a my trip sends a notification of plan a vacation with us.
Yeah.
Ring that bell for the user, right? So is there any time element incorporated in that hook cycle to complete? This is the one major doubt I got. While
when you say time, do you mean time from when you get the notification to when you act?
Yeah, that's what he's asking. So he's asking, probably you need to send a flurry of notifications to make a certain action. Maybe for buying a biryani, the one notification works, but maybe for doing a flight ticket, you need to send 4 different notifications that, oh, the prices have dropped, everybody is booking, and things like that. And it varies from service to service. How do you essentially decide that time that this is when the person will actually make that choice?
Yeah, I think, firstly, it's easier if it's a repeat customer, right? Like, for example, you have some history of how that person has behaved in the past, right? So then you send a biryani notification to somebody when they're most likely to order biryani, and you already know that with data, right? Or you know that I travel in December, I travel during summer. You spike up the notifications you send me during that time, right? Of course, the true victory is when you can provide such a good experience that you don't need to send me a notification. If I feel hungry, I'll open Zomato. Or if I am planning a trip, I'll make my trip, right? So it's of course it's tricky when you're sending that first notification, and again you use your large amounts of data that you already have on multiple customers. You create personas. So if like people like Rachna have done something like this, she is more likely to behave like that, right? So you break it down into personas or segments, right? And then you use that data to send me notifications. But once I convert, right, then you have to, then it boils that's when like the product needs to nail it. You need to nail it and provide like such a superlative experience that slightly becomes intrinsic when I'm thinking of something like that again. But it's not easy. Like everybody's sending hundreds and millions of notifications these days. It's just super hard, which is why apps think of like other ways, right? Like even if you have a core transaction business, how do I content is one way you can engage me, right? So can you get me to come back to read something about financial behavior or stocks or payments or whatever, right? Or then, of course, there's gamification. So notifications are not easy. So you have to figure out other ways to also try and get people coming back, or so that then when they actually want to book a trip, they think about your product.
Makes sense. I think frequency is a very good factor.
Yes.
So that's why people build ancillary services around. Okay, you might not want to plan a trip today, but you might still want something. Maybe you need an invoice, maybe you need something, maybe you need XYZ, and you keep yourself frequent on the platform. It builds top of mind. And next time when you want it, you'll essentially open the app and you go for it. Makes sense. Rachna, can I take 5 more minutes of your time? Is it? Absolutely. Yes. Divij, I'm calling you across. Divij is from cohort 2, Rachna. So previous cohort students have also come. Divij, over to you. Yes.
Hi, Rachna. I'm audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Thank you so much for all the insights. So actually, I was just going through your profile and I just came across that you've done your MBA from IIM Bangalore. And I just want to ask that question that what is your take on MBA nowadays with everything available on the internet? Is this something the charm is still there or not? Specifically, I've seen people doing MBA in product management as well. Do you think if someone wants to start their journey in product management, will this MBA would help them, or something related to this?
So I don't think it's a must. It's an absolute necessity. For example, in CRED, I worked with many colleagues who are doing product management who didn't have MBAs. Even now, there's a person in my team, who chose not to do that. I think a lot of companies now are, especially if you've if you've done entrepreneurship or you've come, for example, if you're a really good person working in data analytics or some other function and you want to move to product management, very often it's not a necessary condition to have an MBA. What an MBA does is it definitely helps you get noticed, right? I mean, there are some companies who do have that as a criteria. So and it helps in that respect. But I don't think it's a must in terms of at least learning how to do product management.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Arjun, the last person. Arjun, I'm calling you across. Guys, any other questions that you have, please forward it across. I'll forward it to Rachna. Arjun is Arjun was in cohort 2. He's a PM at Freight Tiger. Freight Tiger is a logistics company. Arjun, please go for it. Yes.
First of all, thank you so much, Rachna. I've been following you since a long time on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And I have a very close friend of mine who works at Zynga.
Okay.
And so it was a great experience to hear you talk about metrics and with such clarity. And one thing I always saw was that I was really intrigued by your comment that gaming and psychology has a large union. And my question is based on that. So I assume that the first time user experience of a game is extremely important. And what are the specific things that you look at in the way of psychology when it comes to designing FTUE for a specific game or a game module?
So I think some of the things that we look at while designing an FTUE, first time user experience for games, and I think it should be the same for like most consumer products actually, right? I feel like very quickly introduce the person to the core loop, right? What is that loop which is going to repeat endlessly? There will be layers on top of it in the form of quests and events and leagues and leaderboards and all of that, right? But what is that core loop, right? That is the goal of the first time user experience. And I think it's very important now to set goals for say the first 3 days and then the first 1 week and then the first 15 days, right? Break down how that what you want the player to experience and go through during that journey, right? So for example, let's say the first few sessions are about the core loop, that reward, action, reward, trigger, action, reward, trigger, right? Then gradually start introducing them to some of the systems that are going to come later, right? So for example, the battle pass is a very common construct that shows up later in games, which gives you specific tasks to do every day. These systems can be used in a slightly vanilla form early on to kind of guide players through that journey, right? It's called directed gameplay also, right? Because if I throw you in the middle of a field and don't help you at all, you will be lost, right? And games inherently have these constructs. So use them to guide me towards what you believe is the best experience, right? So if you believe that you want me to do action A, action B, get Y number of rewards, kind of try to craft that journey also with these directed gameplay constructs like quests or streaks or battle passes, that kind of a thing. And you need to have very clear goals on what you want the player to achieve in very small increments, right? D3, D7, break it down to that extent is what I would recommend.
Makes sense.
And again, just one last thing. Your engagement in the first 1 week is like the most important thing, right? Because we discussed earlier as well, engagement is the biggest leading indicator to retention. So if you can get me to come back every day in that first 1 week, that's it. You have me as a player, right? That is like the most important metric I think you should track.
Makes sense. Thank you. Rachna, in the interest of time, we have a small ritual where we take a group photograph, and it is something that we do. Janta, please, you already know the most ugly person is already showing the face. Right? आप सब तो अच्छे खासे दिखते हो, तो आप सबको फोटो तो खींचनी चाहिए, right? Make sense? So, at 1, 2, 3, do like this. Say cheese. Everyone, please, can you showcase your cameras? Yes. 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. Awesome. बहुत बढ़िया. So Rachna, first and foremost, thank you very much. I think I took away a lot of things personally. This was such a phenomenal conversation. And Janta, I want feedback. Product managers always want feedback, right? So please, on the Slack channel, give your feedback across. And one more thing, once you post on LinkedIn, do tag Rachna, do tag and put across what did you learn from the session. We will at least do, Rachna, we'll increase your follower count by 500 for sure. That's the typical objective metric that I'm trying to put across.
Nice, thanks. Thanks a lot. It was great being here. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye, folks. See you.